I'm going to touch on two topics, one of which is really an update on what we've been doing with pre-emergent herbicides and mixtures, and I'll talk about some work we're doing trying to get greater control out of our pre-emergent herbicides, particularly in high rainfall areas. And then I'm going to finish up with probably 2 or 3 minutes on where we are with glyphosate-resistant weeds. And there's been a couple of developments there that you probably need to know about. So, start off first, these are our normal survey results. We actually didn't survey South Australia last year. We actually went over to Victoria and did the surveys in Victoria. So South Australia, our results haven't changed very much, but I just want to emphasise that if you look through those results, you can see that it really doesn't matter where we go. We find lots of Group B resistant ryegrass. We find lots of Group A resistant ryegrass, except in the South Australian mallee. And we're finding increasing amounts of Trifluralin resistance in South Australia. But when we went across to the Wimmera and Mallee of Victoria last year and surveyed them again, most things hadn't changed in terms of the amount of resistance they had, except for this one here. And so those guys in 5 years have gone from 5% of paddocks had Trifluralin resistance to 25%, and they're rapidly catching up to South Australia, so I think you guys need to lift your game because we can't have the Victorians getting ahead. No, I'm joking. But what I think that does tell us is that it's actually really important that when we get these new pre-emergent herbicides that have come, that we really look after them, because otherwise we're going to be in a spot in a little while where we're going to do it all over again, find some new control methods. The other thing perhaps that's really concerning me, and I don't have any solutions, is the amount of select resistance we're starting to pick up. Now those numbers aren't particularly high, but when you're starting to talk about 40% of paddocks with select resistance in, that's really going to constrain our rotation so far as pulse crops and to some extent canola go. And you know, we just don't have a lot of other post-emergent options for ryegrass. So that's going to make our whole weed management, so keeping those ryegrass numbers down, much more important. We also started doing some surveys of broadleaf weeds. This is Victoria. I think the good news is that when we did the survey in Victoria, we didn't find any 2,4-D resistance. We know it's out there. We know it's in South Australia too. We didn't find any Group B resistance in wild radish, but again, we know it's out there. We know it's in South Australia too. What we did find was lots of Group B resistance in those small seeded broadleaf weeds. We looked at South Estill and Indian hedge mustard. Be no surprise to you guys that lots of resistance in those in South Australia. Prickly lettuce will be another one. So it's those small seeded broadleaves where the seed bank turns over very quickly. That's where we're getting all our Group B resistance predominantly, and it's very, very widespread. Okay. Pre-emergent herbicides. So what have we got? We've been fiddling around with these for quite some years now, and stuff's starting to come to market. So we've got our Group D chemistry that's still working in some places, but as you see, that's really starting to get under some pressure. Avedex. We started off with rates, well, we've known for years that Avedex gives you some ryegrass control, but we started off with rates that didn't really do it. New farms now working to get higher rates on the label. We know that if you get up at those higher rates, you get some reasonable ryegrass control. In our trials, it tends to be a bit variable, and I think that's the only thing caution I'll have about going with the big rates of Avedex. Fabulous in one trial and just not so good in another. So there's a lot of variability about it, but it does control ryegrass. Box of Gold came out in 2008. You've probably all had a play with Box of Gold. Quite a good ryegrass product early in the season. If we get seasons where we don't get a lot of rainfall in spring, well, that's good enough. But 2010 really tested Box of Gold, and I think a lot of people had some pretty sad results in that sort of season. It's certainly, it's going to have to be an important part of what we do. But I think we need to be thinking about where we actually put that in the rotation and how we actually manage it. And of course, unfortunately, when we're sowing, we don't know what spring's going to be like. So it's going to be a little bit hard to predict how that's going to go. Sakura. Sakura's been launched this year. This is the one that we've been talking about for years and years. It's been a really robust product in our trials. Very long residual. For pre-emergent herbicides, that's good, picks up lots of ryegrass, keeps picking up the ryegrass sometimes, but it's a problem in terms of rotation, and for South Australia I think this is where this herbicide's really going to have, the residual activity is really going to have some issues. There's long plant backs to oats, long plant backs to durum. So, you know, if your growers have got oats or durum in their rotations, this has got to be 2 years in front. So that's where your box of gold's going to come in, okay, because you're going to have to use that in the intervening year leading up to those crops. Also, this is only going to be for wheat and triticale at the moment, not durums. Don't put it on durums. I've seen some really good durum control out of this product. So again, because it's only wheat and triticale, you know, your box of gold's going to be there for your barley, for your durums, and potentially for other crops. Outlook hasn't come yet. We keep talking about outlook coming. It's probably about 12 months away. It's not going to be for cereals. It's going to be initially for pulses and then possibly for canola. One of the things about this chemistry is a lot of this new chemistry we're getting is not really very suitable to canola. And I think this is where we really need to keep that Trifluralin and Avedex type chemistry in our rotation, so that we'll have a good product for canola. The others will give us good products for all the other crops. When we actually look at what we've been turning up, we started off with 5 modes of action in our original trials. We're down to 2 that have come to market. They're J's and K's. Okay, so there's, you know, quite a bit of new chemistry, but not lots of new modes of action. So we need to rotate these modes of action. And frankly, you're not going to be able to use Sakura every year, so you're going to be forced to rotate these modes of action. And I think the real trick is working out how to do that really well. Okay, just some trial results from last year, just for fun. This is a bit of a Trifluralin resistant population because that was 3 litres of Triflurex, and it kind of controlled it, but not fabulously well. And when we start looking at this new chemistry, you know, pretty much it all works pretty well on ryegrass. This was actually a trial where we had quite a competitive wheat crop in it, and that really helped some of these products out. So that's one thing we can do with pre-emergent herbicides, is add crop competition to them. It really helps them out. A few things we played around there. We started splitting products that we've been doing a few years, and that gives you a bit of control in the row with, say, box of gold. But when we try, say, Avedex, no, don't try it with Avedex. Put all your Avedex up front. No point playing any games with that. If you don't get it incorporated, you lose it. So that's what you want to do. We've also started playing around with some post-emergence, and we put in this trial just post-emergent alone of a couple of these products. You know, box of gold was kind of okay post-emergent. This was quite a site we had quite a lot of rainfall, so it, but we didn't get that rainfall early. So we had a bit of a dry period, and it didn't really activate that box of gold very well, and that's a risk with box of gold post. If you don't get that rainfall after putting it out, and you've got moisture in the soil, your ryegrass will just come up through it. And that's what happened to us. And for some reason or other, we put Sakura out post. Don't try this at home. It doesn't work. Okay, if you want to use Sakura, it really does need to be in front of the seeder, because you'll see there we just got ordinary control. Move on. One of the things we've started doing, of course, is not just measuring control, but how much seed set we get. This was a competitive wheat crop, and what we ended up counting was the number of ryegrass panicles that got above the crop canopy. Now, they're the ones going to set most of the seed. So what happened? Sakura post, well, it didn't really do anything. A lot of these products did pretty well, kept the numbers right down, but look here at Sakura and Sakura plus Avedex. They stopped that ryegrass from really getting above the canopy. So even though there was ryegrass in the crop, when we put a competitive crop on it, we kept that ryegrass short. That's the residual activity of Sakura. That's where it really comes into play. So, there's actually added bonus with that product. The other thing we've been playing with has been, is really trying to ask the question, partly because we've been doing some surveys in some really high rainfall areas where they've got lots of ryegrass and lots of resistance, is what can we do with this chemistry to get extra control? So this is a trial. This trial had 600 ryegrass plants per metre squared in the untreated. Pretty big ryegrass population. Not as big as I've seen, but pretty big. And it's the sort of crop where if you didn't actually control that ryegrass, you're cutting hay. So this is the sort of level of control. When you start getting really high ryegrass populations, you put pre-emergent herbicides under a lot of pressure. And you can see that here. We were getting really high levels of control previously. they're not doing quite so good. You know, Avadex Extra, I told you, it tends to be a bit variable. You know, even Sakura, which has been, you know, pretty robust, was still under a bit of pressure in that trial. What we wanted to do in there was to actually have a product up front and then come back at that 2-leaf ryegrass stage after the wheat was up and put out Boxer Gold to try and pick up some of that ryegrass. Now, we know Boxer Gold does control some of that ryegrass, and so what we were trying to do was to get really high levels of control, because in these wheat crops there's nothing else these growers can do except cut hay. And when we started looking at that, you can see, well, Trifluralin followed by Boxer Gold wasn't real good, but these others, when we put that Boxer Gold out post-emergent, worked exceptionally well. We were getting 90% plus season-long control out of that treatment with the ryegrass. So, you know, I think we can play a few games with some of this chemistry and make it work. There's always a risk with putting Boxer Gold out post-emergent, because what you need is to have somewhere between 10 millimetres and about 25 millimetres of rainfall to get it to work perfectly. If you get too little, it doesn't do anything, and if you get a couple of inches, you're likely to get some crop damage. So there's risk associated with it, but there's risk associated with not controlling ryegrass. So it's about how we do this. This is not for everyone, but for guys who've got big ryegrass problems and don't want to cut hay, this might be the way that you take them. And I know that, because I've been talking to Syngenta, that they're actually quite interested in an application post-emergent, and we'll have to see how we go with registrations on that. Okay, control of seed heads in that. You can see that, you know, you don't really get control early. You know, we're getting big numbers of seed heads. These ones out here, look how much of that population we brought down. So we're not only got good control early, but we're actually not letting a lot of that seed get back into the seed bank. Competitive crops really help here too. Okay, just a quick touch on glyphosate resistance before I finish. There's a couple of places where glyphosate resistance has really turned up over the last couple of years. We saw in South Australia, we got lots of calls from growers last year and from consultants last year about small patches in paddocks. And, you know, we tested a lot of material resistant to glyphosate. So glyphosate's out there in small patches in your paddocks, and so our number of sites in winter grains has sort of jumped a bit. But this one here, we did a roadside survey last year across every state of Australia except Tasmania, and what we found was that there was resistant weeds on roadsides. In South Australia, it was mostly this stuff, ryegrass, so some of you might recognise where this is located, but on this particular road there's about 80 kilometres of patches of ryegrass that are resistant to glyphosate. We also found glyphosate-resistant fleabane in South Australia on roadsides. Now, you're all going to say to me, oh yeah, but glyphosate doesn't control fleabane, but that's because you're spraying it when it's this big. We had little rosettes and sprayed them with 3 litres of Touchdown High-Tech, where you really do kill them, except for all the ones we didn't kill. So we had half a dozen populations. We think that they've probably come out of horticultural systems, so, you know, orchards, where a lot of glyphosate gets used. When they get on the roadside, of course, if the councils are just using glyphosate, well, you're going to have fleabane that's resistant to glyphosate. And the problem with this sort of situation, so here's all our glyphosate-resistant ryegrass. It goes down here, past that tree there, comes back the other side. We've got a paddock on this side. We've got a fence line. What's the farmer doing on the fence line? Spraying glyphosate, probably. So in this sort of circumstance, it doesn't matter who gets resistance, it's going to get shared. So I think the message is that you actually are going to get glyphosate resistance coming onto the farm from the neighbours, and it's not just going to be neighbouring farmers. Okay, it can be the railways, it can be irrigation managers, and it can be the councils on their roadsides. Now we're talking to roadside managers, and some of them are taking a bit of notice. This was about 4 weeks later on that roadside. They'd gone out and cleaned it all up. Okay, but I think from your perspective, you've got to realise that for your clients, that this stuff can come in from other places. The clients need to be prepared to manage it. So I'm going to finish there, Susan. I think I've used up all my time, but there'll be time for questions at the end.
Chris, on one of your graphs you had Sakura split. What were the timings of those?
These splits are up in front of the seeder and then coming immediately after the seeder operation's gone through as opposed to pre-emergent. And the concept there is to try and pick up that ryegrass that's in the row on a knife point press wheel system. Secura's not fabulous at that. Box of Gold's better because it's got more water solubility. I don't know. It's one of those things that we've been trying and playing around with to try and see if we can really get it to work effectively. I know some consultant growers are interested in it, pursuing it, but the results are quite variable.
Yeah, Chris, I don't know if you've seen much resistance to Clearfield, any of that with wild oats?
We've got some Group B resistant wild oats. I don't know if they're resistant to the IMI chemistry or just to a SAR. But we do have IMI-resistant Brome now from Victoria. So one of the things about Clearfield is this Group B. We know Group Bs don't last very long. So great chemistry, but we're going to burn through that pretty quickly.